How big did you say? In this video, we will look at the scale of the Syrian crisis compared to that of the German displacement post-World War II. The first portion of this video will be examining the magnitude of the German crisis, primarily regarding the numbers and methods. This is to better compare the conditions of movement between the two crises, as opposed to simply casing them as a single kind of motion. The video will approach modes of transit, methods of displacement, forced or voluntary, and seek to distinguish the numbers of people displaced. In comparison, particularly in the case of Syria, to those who have been registered as refugees in other countries. This is not to be confused with patterns of motion or settlement of displaced people, as those are separate topics. This video is purely to examine the numeric magnitude of the events in contrast with one another. Goodbye home, hello father. After the war in Europe ended on VE Day, plans were clearly laid out to expel German populations from the countries they were at the time calling home. The number of expellees varies based on the amount of territory ceded to the Red Army and Poland post-war. The low estimates were close to 4.5 million people, with just a few territories that belonged to Germany surrendered. This was prior to more information coming in. After reports became more accurate, it was clear that these are not only low, but inaccurate estimates that assume only Poland is really going to expel people. The higher end of these estimates, and unfortunately the more realistic ones, began at 5.4 million people being forcibly extradited from the countries that they had been calling home. This was realistic only if 5 territories were given to the Polish government. If an additional 3 territories which the government wanted were handed over, the number would increase another 3.3 million, resulting in a total of 8.7 million people to be extradited. There were multiple problems with the plan to extradite these people. Firstly, there wasn't room in the countries they would be extradited to. Germany, for instance, was largely leveled after the war and had nowhere near enough homes for 1.5 million families, or 6 million people, on the low end of the forced extradition. Another overall problem with this plan is that it had counted on there being no more than 10 million expellees, which, as it would turn out, was horrifically low. The original extradition plan called for a certain quantity of people leaving of their own accord, only having to forcefully move roughly 750,000 and only looking at transferring Germans from Poland and Czechoslovakia. All of these assumptions would prove to be completely wrong. Home, a ruin. As for the Syrian emergency, as dubbed by the UNHCR, the numbers begin relatively similar to that of the low-end estimates for German expulsion. The current number of people that have fled Syria since 2011, according to the UNHCR, numbers at 5.6 million people. These people have been dispersed throughout the neighboring countries of Lebanon, Jordan, and Turkey, with each country taking in its share of people, at least the number it can realistically support. These are simply the people who have fled and are registered. However, some of the population and overall the larger issues are the ones who have yet to be able to flee and have been internally displaced, as they are still potentially at risk in the fighting. While the UNHCR does not categorize these people as threatened, the enemies in this conflict have proven to be tactically sneaky, and as a result it isn't always clear where they are going to show up. The internally displaced people's numbers at roughly 6.6 million, according to the UNHCR, bringing the total of displaced persons to 12.2 million people, between those who have fled and those who have been internally displaced. The UNHCR also categorizes another approximate 3 million people, 2.98 million to be precise, in hard-to-reach besieged areas, still in need in Syria as well. Combining these numbers results in 28.28 million people that have either been displaced, are in need, or are in grave danger. This video focuses primarily on the displaced people. Half the problem with tracking the actual number of displaced people in the case of Syria is that the registration process, or lack thereof in some cases. In May of 2015, the UNHCR, at the demands of the Lebanese government, ceased registrations of new refugees in Lebanon. This means that the approximate 946,000 refugees that are registered in Lebanon could potentially be a gross understatement. Another example of this is that there are 3.3 million refugees that are known to be registered in Turkey. Again, the question is simply how many unregistered peoples who at that point become akin to illegal aliens are there? The people lack rights, legal protections, monetary resources, and often basic human needs. The number of refugee camps in this situation has also stagnated, meaning that more people are still leaving, yet there aren't new places for them to go. Where do they intersect? These two crises intersect in a few ways in this case. The first is numerically. The numbers that were simply displaced are relatively similar in estimates, with the Germany crisis predicted to be an approximate 10 million people, and the Syrian emergency currently standing at 12.2 million displaced. The second is that some of the movement has been planned, some has not necessarily been planned. In the coming videos, there will be discussion of the different kinds of displacement experienced, and that will create clarity as to what the difference of a planned versus an unplanned displacement is. The planned displacement, in this case, is more orderly, clear, registered, and somewhat safer for the peoples involved in it, as opposed to the unorganized. People fleeing of their own accord, but not necessarily seeking aid from international societies, can be in particularly precarious situations, as their legal status is even lower than that of the registered refugees. These people can risk being deported back to their strife-ridden nations and put back in the lines of danger that they had just fled. How the humanitarian crises are handled truly makes a difference in the survival rates of the refugees, and the legal assistance, housing, monetary, and needs of the people, when addressed, can make the lives of the refugees less miserable. Could these basic dignities and kind treatment perhaps help these people integrate into societies which have adopted them and help them escape the danger in their homes? Is there potential for these refugees to live in peace among the societies that they live in now, or will they bring strife with them in a different way? What about home? Will they call these new countries home, or seek to return to the country they called home for so many years instead, even with it being potentially in ruins? These questions will be answered in later videos, so for now, stay informed, stay interested, and most of all, never forget the past, as it always comes back to the present eventually.